Okay. It looks like we're live. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Codebreakers episode that kind of falls in line with Valentine's Day. I have my own opinions about it, but we're not going to start with my opinions. This episode is building on the episode that we did about the meme that is princesses. So we went through the whole Frozen epidemic, right? And that episode, we just went into so many different rabbit holes. We decided to build on that, and what better way to build on that than having to do with Valentine's Day and love, which continues gender norms. So we're going to discuss objectification because it really kind of goes back to that overall concept, that theory. And while we were talking about objectification, the concept of power came up. So the power struggle between men and women, which has to do a lot with gender norms. And then there are a lot of other rabbit holes that we can go down. So we'll see which ones we end up taking. But first, I'm going to introduce all of my co-hosts. There's quite a few of us today. First, I'll go with Stephanie Sims. Hey, Stephanie.
Hey, Alex. It's always great to hang with you. I'm excited. It's going to be fun.
It is. It is. And then I have the always lovely Gina Fidel. Hello.
Hi. Good to see you guys.
And then we do have a male representative, guys, so don't get mad at us. We have Ammon Jones. Hello, Ammon.
Hello, glad to be here. Token minority.
Yes, you are. You are our token man of the day. Lucky you. Oh, yay! And it looks like Kristen's camera finally came up. Hey, Kristen.
Hey, I know how to make an entrance on the stage there.
You do. That was like perfect timing. It was great.
Nice timing.
All right, so we're just going to dive right into this topic because there is so much to discuss. I'm worried we're going to go over an hour because we had a meeting, me, Stephanie, and Gina had a meeting about it, and we went a little bit over an hour while we were just talking about what we're going to talk about. So I'm just going to give a basic conceptualization of what objectification theory is because it does fit in really well with what we're talking about. So objectification theory really started more in feminism, so I honestly don't know that much about it. It's not my personal field, but it basically started with the notion that women are seen as objects in our culture, and the media really made this this field a really big boom. A lot of people got really interested in the concept of objectification culture when broadcast television started because that really kind of solidified this notion of women as an object. And then it became self-objectification. So it started as just objectification, and then we moved into self-objectification. So if we're seeing others as objects, if we're seeing other women as objects, that in turn makes us see ourselves as objects. So it's kind of this self-perpetuating cycle, which unfortunately is not the best self-perpetuating cycle. And more recently, there has been more concern with men falling into this objectification culture and having issues with, we have things like Magic Mike. A lot of people are speaking out about Magic Mike and how it's objectifying men, and there have been more and more studies about what this objectification is doing to not only women in their body image but also men. So that's objectification in a nutshell. And while we were having our discussion before this, I think it was Gina that brought up that actually objectification can go back really beyond media, right?
Yeah, it's a historical issue. It's nothing new. It was defined and the theory was created, I believe, in 1997, and just to identify and name something that already existed. It wasn't that it was a new phenomena. And it comes from women as property, and the ownership for women. So that's kind of where it stems from.
Right.
Which is ancient.
Stephanie, looks like you have something to say.
Yeah, well, no, and I was just going to say that was kind of how we started talking about the whole connection with power. right, was this notion that for so long, although it hasn't necessarily been public or publicly acknowledged or widespread, the objectification has existed, and so is part of what happened during the feminist revolution, if you will, sort of a backlash. And not only let's not objectify ourselves, but let's take back some of that power. And that's where we kind of jumped into plenty of the subjects that I know we're going to get into, but that part is super interesting to me. Have we for example, started objectifying men because that's what has always happened to us as women, and it's the way that we exercise our power.
Right, and then, I mean, really the tie-in to Valentine's Day is when you think about, and this is where my opinions might come out, but when you think about how we represent our love on Valentine's Day, rather than just, going to the person you love and expressing that love, we do it through things like rings and chocolates and flowers, and advertisers are taking huge advantage of that. I mean, Stephanie mentioned the multiple advertisements that she's getting for what was it? Red something?
Yeah, red bras. For example, I get an email a day, from Victoria's Secret or any of the other, even clothing companies, for example, are out there saying, "Oh, don't you need a hot red dress, or don't you need a little black dress for Valentine's Day?" And you're like, really? That's kind of weird. But that's where some of the interesting questions come up, because what that is it's really, to me, the playing on your fear, right? Because love is supposed to be this beautiful thing, but what happens if you're not sexy enough? Is your guy going to leave you? And for guys, it's the same thing. What happens if you don't bring the right flowers, or the candy box isn't big enough? And we've turned what's supposed to be a celebration, to me, into this opportunity for everybody to be more afraid and sell more products.
Yeah, and I want to add, too, the way that we're tying this together and some of your thinking, Alex, about basically objectification is a remove from the reality. It's a way of disconnecting and separating. So what you're describing about Valentine's Day is a parallel to that. It's another way of separating from what the real true meaning is, and creating this disconnect that keeps us apart rather than pulling us together. And objectification is so habitualized, and it's so thoroughly internalized for all of us that we can't even see what the patterns are. We can't even see what half of the behaviors are. It's just a constant. It's just become who we are, and I believe that's why it's happening for boys and men too. Because if the entire culture is doing this for women, then of course it's going to spread out. But I don't think that men. I believe it's a much smaller problem for men, obviously, because they've always had the power and they are the dominant gender. So, or I don't mean that the way that sounded, which you guys know, but I want the audience to understand that too. So anyway.
So, Ammon, would you do you feel like, as our token man, do you feel like you have more barriers to this concept of self-objectification? Do you feel like, throughout, like, does culture offer you more barriers to considering yourself as an individual rather than an object?
I think men actually get it earlier than women. I can't tell you how young you have to be as a male to be told boys don't cry. I have to tell you how early you are expected to be strong, dominant, brave. If danger happens, the boy steps in front. Why? Why? Oh, that girl hit you? Well, you can't hit her back. She's a girl. Hang on, she hit me first. Why not? And the objectification, the role of male as defender, protector, warrior, hunter, comes in very, very early. And yeah, part of that is because of memetics. It's because of stereotypes. It's because our brains are designed to work with patterns, and the way we work with patterns quickly is we simplify them. So we come up with stereotypes and we come up with tropes. What worries me more about Valentine's Day isn't the way it separates the sexes or the way it targets the sexes. It's the very fact that it kind of forgot what Valentine's Day is about. There's a reason that you don't sign a Valentine's Day. It's supposed to be about unrequited and unexpected love. It's not a day for taking your partner out. If your partner needs one day to tell her you love her, you've been doing things wrong. You know, every day should be saying that. This was supposed to be a day to raise the spirits of somebody else and to say, you're loved. And we've lost that because that's not commercial enough. And just as Halloween has lost all meaning and become Candy Day and Dress Up Day, Valentine's has now been turned into Book a Restaurant Table Day and Buy Your Lover Some Chocolates Day, which completely loses the meaning of Valentine, who I can assure you was not a great dater.
What? But I mean, it is like, this is my big issue with Valentine's Day. I call it Hallmark Day, because that's, to me, that's what I feel like it is. And like, Hallmark was like, hey, I need some money. This day we can convince men that they need to buy a bunch of this stuff for their ladies. And every Valentine's Day, I always end up with a friend who's crying because the guy that she liked didn't get her something, or her boyfriend got her chocolates and she wanted flowers, or she got one rose and she wanted a dozen. Like, there's a disconnect, and it goes back to what Gina was saying about objectification. There's this disconnect between us as individuals and what we're doing to express that individuality, express any sort of emotion that we have.
But I have a question for you, Alex. Do you think that that's kind of a larger symptom of this need to be less vulnerable? Because as we're sharing more on social media and as we're talking, connecting with more and more people, and we've mentioned this before in previous shows, more people are hiding who they really are because they feel this pressure to be what's accepted. You know, they feel this pressure to be part of the group. I need to be the perfect boyfriend, the perfect husband, the perfect wife, the perfect mom, and that's what I show to the world. And because you're showing it more and more, because you're having these multiple connections and you're showing it more and more, it actually is becoming harder to be who you are and to express the real feelings you have for the people close to you. And so I don't know that objectification is necessarily caused by media, but I do think that the lack of self-awareness maybe is increased by this multiplication of interactions. I don't know. What do you guys think?
Yeah. So that's so funny that you say that, because I was listening to the radio today, and I just I died laughing. Apparently, the biggest no to do on Valentine's Day is for women to send themselves flowers. And first of all, I was just dying laughing because I was thinking about like the process of calling a florist and being like, hi, I need a dozen roses sent to this office, and, you know, like maybe try to disguise my voice to sound like a man. But the other thing that's funny about that to me was I was like, why? Why is it so bad that I want to show self-love and be like, and send and get myself flowers? Is it because they're doing it in their office so that they're showing, you know, they're doing this display of somebody loves me, and so it comes down to, what's the purpose of the flowers? Are the flowers there to, you know, to tell everybody that they are someone of significance, or are the flowers there to have them feel that self-love? That's what that made me think of, Stephanie. It was so funny. It was so funny. It was awesome. But it's
sad that it wasn't celebrated as a gesture. I think it's a great idea. It's a lot better than crying because somebody else didn't give you something that you thought you wanted. But to appreciate yourself, if it's a day that everybody's getting flowers and you happen to want some too, that's fabulous. Just buy the flowers.
Yeah, so it looks like Kristen actually has a comment about objects, since we're talking about flowers.
I just wanted to bring up like the developmental side of it because it goes back to like, so there's Piaget, and he had this theory of object permanence, and it's around like 4 or 5 months when the infant is able to notice when objects leave. They play peekaboo with them, and they interact with you at that stage. So noticing when objects are gone, and then being able to connect that, I think that's really a strong reason for having a token given to us as a sign of affection.
A transitional object? Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, like you have your ring, and it's natural to associate it with someone that you love. So I think that it's not a bad thing to give these tokens.
But, okay, so I hear what you're saying, and I understand that. But, again, I think we get back to what Alex was saying, which is, what's the motivation? Because if the motivation, for example, I would not be unhappy if, my husband showed up and brought me flowers. I'm not going to say, oh, it's Valentine's Day, so I don't want those. But there's something about the fact that he only brings them to me on Valentine's Day that leaves a unpleasant feeling, because then it doesn't feel like there's a real sentiment behind it. It feels like perfunctory, like, oh, okay, this is the day I'm supposed to buy flowers, or on my birthday. Now in our family we do it differently. We never do it on the right day. So I never get anything on my birthday. It's always another day. But we're just disorganized like that. But that means that at least they thought of it, and it wasn't, oh my gosh, I have to go out and do this. Does that make sense? And so I think that's part of the problem that people are struggling with.
Well, and there's that, but there's also the need for cultures to participate in traditions. So
I was just going to mention the same thing. Humans love ritual, and we've always had rituals. So this is a contemporary ritual that, because of media and consumerism and commercialism and capitalism and all this stuff, it's just gotten pounded at and way exaggerated. But where it comes from isn't necessarily not a sweet thing. The tradition and the ritual of having a special time when you honor your love or you declare your love in itself isn't a problem, I don't think. It's that it becomes a Hallmark day. It's that it has become so removed from those initial feelings and motivations that it's become ugly, and then somebody like Alex will develop a hatred towards it. I have a similar thing for Mother's Day, because you start walking into stores months before it, and it's just in your face. And if you don't happen to be a mother, and if you don't happen to still have a mother alive, you do start to begin to say, okay, I'm going to mother myself, and I'm going to do something special for myself on Mother's Day, which is kind of where I've taken it. So I imagine it to be something quite similar. When you're the individual that's left out of the crowd, when you're the one that's left out of the, I'm trying to find another word other than tradition, and it's not coming to me, but that sets you apart from the herd, and that's a bad feeling. Nobody wants to be in that position. So if you have the majority of humans doing this thing and you're not part of it, of course you're going to feel bad. And that's where the danger lies, in my opinion.
Yeah, absolutely. I just wanted to bring up, so apparently Bruno is totally on page with me, and I love it. He says, I just want to go back in time and sue the guy who created this, which is great. I love it. But I think you're right. Like, we're going back to this idea of, it's one of the problems with traditions is this idea of being inside of a group. So we're now dealing with in-groups and out-groups, which totally fits with memetics, right? Memetics are all about feeling like you're a part of a group. That's how a meme gets passed on. So it actually makes sense that Valentine's Day has, and the traditions, I guess, or the components that go with it have become a meme. They've been passed on. When I think of traditions, like, I have no issue with people celebrating anniversaries. When I think of that, when I think of, like, like my parents, well, they're not really good at, they both forget their anniversary all the time. But if they celebrate their anniversary for the day that they were married, I have no issue with that. And that, to me, is a tradition, to celebrate an anniversary, and it still has the meaning that it did when they first celebrated it, right? So there's this, again, we're going back to this disconnect between what the day is supposed to represent and what it has come to represent. And I don't know, I love the media, I always defend the media, so I don't know if we can blame the media so much, but it's an interesting thing to think about. And I totally get what Kristen is saying as far as traditions.
Well, it's interesting if you go back to objectification and then self-objectification. And self-objectification is internalizing the qualities of the objectification so that you come to believe them all on your own. You become your own worst enemy then, because you've taken in all of what's been imposed on you. So you're really, here we are again at that parallel that you're describing, where the thing that people are conforming to is actually putting pressure on the individual, and then the individual begins to internalize, well, what does it mean that I'm not participating the same way that everybody else is? And then there's that self-doubt and the insecurity and the harmful sorts of introspection and compulsions to believe that you're not good enough. So it erodes your own self-esteem on a certain level. I mean,
right, and it goes back to the power dynamic that Stephanie hinted at a couple of minutes ago, right? It's going back to this. If we're feeling that insecurity, if we're losing that self-esteem, we're going to rely more on the gender norms that we are fed. We're going to rely more on, well, I'm supposed to be this frail woman anyway. It's okay. I can rely on a man. And the men are feeling, they're like, oh, well, I don't have any of this self-esteem. So a lot of them overcompensate, and they act like they do, and they act like they're really strong, rather than trying to explore where that lack of self-esteem is coming from.
Yeah, so then you have both genders not being true to who they are, and you've got this big mess. Well, and the media loves that. The media makes money on that, and that's back to what you were talking about, Stephanie, with fear.
Well, and I
it's
guess
all the cyclical thing.
Yeah, I guess my other question is, as you were talking about that, we've seen a rise in the divorce rate relatively precipitously since, say the 60s. Some of that also there's other social factors, the fact that, divorce is easier to get, and that now it's not just, adultery based and things like that, but is part of what we're seeing, the fact that people have a harder time staying together due to the fact that they're both having these ridiculous expectations of the other that stay unexpressed. So you don't go into a relationship, I don't think, I've been in a relationship for a while, but usually you don't go in and say, so I'm really counting on you to make all the money because I want to stay home and raise kids. That's not the way you open. And the guy probably isn't saying, I know I'm supposed to be the guy that you want to bring all this money to the relationship, but what I really do want to do is, be a carpenter or stay home and raise kids. Nobody leads with that. And so you build a relationship based on a false impression of the other person, which could be part of the explanation for why now that it's easier to get out of the relationship, you realize, holy crap, this person isn't the person I thought they were.
Okay. Yeah, or you enter in thinking that you can change the person and mold them into what you want and need. I think people do that a lot, and then don't have the communication skills or the ability to really get to know each other, like you're describing.
What were you going to say? Sorry.
Well,
It brings up the question of, which Kristen brought up in the chat, of these dating websites, and the fact that a lot more people are using a mediated context. So they're using either an app on their phone, Tinder for my age group, very questionable platform. But you know, there's the more legitimate dating sites like eHarmony, and there's the free ones like Plenty of Fish. I'm trying to think of all the ones that my friends tell me about. There are a bunch
Because
of
you
them,
don't
but
have personal experience with them.
only Tinder, and it started out genuine, but then it just became my own personal communication study, which was fascinating. But that's why I'm not allowed on dating websites. It just becomes a place for me to like, oh, this is interesting. I wonder how many people respond like this. But it does bring up an interesting, as far as Kristen's comment about dating websites, is the mediated context. Is it allowing us more opportunity to fake it? Is it allowing us more opportunity to be this false image for the other person? That person falls in love with that image, and then they meet us, and they're like, oh, that's you?
I think
Yeah.
the expectation thing itself is huge. I mean, in our grandparents' day, you expected to meet a nice girl that you could get on with. You weren't expecting fireworks. You weren't expecting that every time you kissed, some great camera angle of life was going to pan off to a fireplace or the rolling waves. You know, it was just, I can get on with this person, and together we can support each other and have a family and continue the tradition. We didn't expect as much, whereas now every single relationship we kind of expect to be like the big screen Hollywood epics, and we're not really quite ready to settle for anything else. And I think that's a huge part of the divorce rate. I think it's a huge part of our own dissatisfaction with ourselves and with our lives, is that we've all kind of bought into the fiction. We've all bought into the memetics.
Yeah, that's a great point.
It's something that it is an impossibility. And yeah, we try and put on our best behaviour, the honeymoon period of any relationship, and before it, the courting time. Now, I reject that. I say, look, be yourself, because that's who you want them to love. If you put on your best airs and graces, well, if you can't maintain that, what's the point? You've now built up the expectation that that's what life with you is going to be like. And if that pressure is going to crush you, you're making a cross for your own back. You really are.
Well,
Yeah.
It's an interesting thing. I have some good friends of mine, and they all, when you ask them, they've been married for 20, 25 years, you ask them, what was the biggest mistake you made? And invariably they'll say, I was super nice at the beginning. And it's the same with couple relationships, but it's also the same with a parental relationship. And when you read a lot of parenting books, they'll tell you that, but you don't think about it. You're like, oh, my baby's so cute. Oh, it's so gorgeous. Let me do everything for them. And then you're surprised when at 2 years old, they turn around to you and say, well, no, you're supposed to do that. And so how you start out is crucial to the future of the relationship, because if you start out, like you said, Ammon, if you start out being someone you're not, they're going to fall in love, but they're going to fall in love with someone else. It's not you they fell in love with.
It's interesting, though, because there is communication research that says that, and it's this guy Walther. He does so much amazing research. I would love to work with him. But he has a couple of models that really explore this concept. One of them is the hyperpersonal model, which says that when we meet someone online, they do a lot of self-presentation, they do a lot of impression management, so they give off this image of who they are. Sometimes, even though they don't fit that image in reality, we see it anyway. We look past the flaws because we've gotten so used to the person online. When we meet them, we still see them the way that we saw them originally. So it's almost like you continue to live in this fantasy forever. But he also has another model that says if you meet someone online, as long as you offer enough time, it will build the same relationship online that you would have offline. So he's got these two different models, and of course personal characteristics are going to play into which one you fit. But there is actually research on this that says that really building relationships online aren't going to be that different than offline. We just need to offer more time for people to offer more disclosures when they're more comfortable with it.
That's not surprising to me. And I know a lot of people that are married that met online and have really good relationships. So it's possible, and it's such an individual thing. But we have totally over-romanticized love. People think that loving someone is the same as being in love with someone, and it's entirely different. You start with that in love, the love drugs in your system and all that chemistry that's running you, and when that wears off, that's when you can really develop love and friendship. And people, I think that people just aren't aware of that. They don't realize it because they're buying into what they're told by the media. And, you left out the horse galloping down the beach, and, it's just, and the doves and the
rainbow. The big rainbow that comes out, and
right.
the choir, the angelic choir.
In the film noir, it was sometimes a train, but never mind, that was a slightly different euphemism.
You had to go there.
Well,
there is this level of fakery generally, and as I say, the more we all buy into this, or the more we feel we have to compete with it, even if we don't like it. We think if everyone else is faking, then I kind of need to as well, or I'm going to look like the one ugly mug in the. The more we buy into that, the more dissatisfied we become with what we get because we are not getting it. That fake person that has conned their way into getting it has got it. It's like some of the people who fake their resumes and beef up their resumes to get a job. They are actually far more dissatisfied with that job than if they'd got it on their own actual resume. And there's been quite a bit of research into this, and yeah, dissatisfaction. They always feel like they didn't quite merit it, and it kind of takes away from the whole job for them because this fake person got the job. They never got it. They never got it on their own merit, so they don't get that pride and satisfaction in it.
There's that A word again, right? Authenticity.
That is a perfect transition into what I was wanting to bring up about the OkCupid site, is that is actually, it was created by people that studied big data. They are scientists that have been able to, through gathering information on our natural rhythms online, be able to gather information that we can then, we don't have to make a blanket judgment because it's actually based on science. And there's one of the co-founders came out with a book called Dataclysm recently, and it goes into, I put the link in to the into the event, but it's really interesting.
Well, and I like the notion of trying to give people things that match what they're doing. But I'm wondering if part of the issue is not related to the fact that we're not aware, that these mimetic things are happening in our heads, and we've adapted them, like we talked about. We've just accepted, this is what you do on Valentine's Day. A great example of this is the video in the resources that we put in the event that talks about the engagement ring, and the fact that the engagement ring is something that a company made up, right? A company just made up the notion of an engagement ring, but now, even if you don't believe in it, you still have to buy it. That's just the way it goes because it's part of our culture. It's really become, it's not even a meme anymore, it's just a tradition. It's passed from some people do it to this is the way everybody does it. And I think that until we're able to recognize that that's what's happening, and maybe be in a relationship with somebody who recognizes it too, so that we can agree, okay, we're not going to celebrate Valentine's Day because we think it's a cheesy Hallmark holiday. We'll have our celebration next weekend, on a day that's not Valentine's Day. It's going to be awfully hard for people to get out of the faking it.
Yeah, totally. And some people don't even know. There's like a whole culture of modern day like African Americans that do this ceremony called jumping the broom, and that came from a slave owner who was all evidence points to that the slave owner was being kind and wanted to give his slaves an opportunity to have a ceremony. He was ignorant of, African traditions, but at that time, African Americans slaves were not allowed to marry. So he created this thing, and it's been passed down generation to generation, and people do that now because they identify with their culture that way. And so you bring up a really great point, like, you have to strip down the barriers, and then find a partner who feels the same way that you do. Like, I don't believe that it's a good thing to have Santa Claus. I think that, I think it's lying. I have yet to find a partner that is like, no, we have to have Santa, or, like, it seems like you always have that discussion prior to, and then things can also change after. So just being open to the discussion is key, at least.
Yeah.
But
I'm not with you on the Santa thing.
I think we also
I've been one of those ones straight in the footprints.
We also have to acknowledge that even if you and your partner, so I am like super, I hate Valentine's Day, Hallmark Day, whatever you want to call it, even if I find a partner that agrees, like a boyfriend I had a while ago, a couple of my boyfriends, even if they agree, I still have Ammon's putting funny stuff in the chat. I still have a bunch of friends around me that celebrate Valentine's Day. And then you deal with the awkward, they're like, oh my god, come out on a double date. Or even when I'm single, being single on Valentine's Day is even worse, because then you're like the pitiful friend that doesn't have a date. So they're like, oh, just come, I'll set you up with one of his friends. It'll be great. And even if I'm like, oh no, I don't celebrate Valentine's Day, it's fine. They think that I'm just trying to be like, the strong single person that's like, I don't celebrate Valentine's Day. Right? So even if I do find a partner that agrees with me, you're still dealing with a lot of pressure from everybody else around you, because I would think that a lot of men that do enter a relationship with a woman and you both agree you don't celebrate Valentine's Day, I can imagine that man gets a lot of backlash from other people being like, what? Wait, you're not getting her something? You're not getting her flowers, you're not getting her chocolate, what do you mean you're not like, there's all of this, and then I think about when I was a little kid. My parents never celebrated Valentine's Day, but they still had to like help me get cards for the whole class, and they had to walk that line where they don't celebrate Valentine's Day, but does that mean that they should tell me not to celebrate Valentine's Day? So I think there's a lot more pressure outside. Even if you can get your intimate relationship to agree, there's so many other cultural things around you that could have an effect.
Okay, I've got a couple for this. First thing is, my partner and I do not celebrate Valentine's Day. Never have, never will, because we are believers in that thing. Look, if you're not expressing it every day, what's the point of going out one day a year if you haven't already said it? And do you know what? Nobody notices, nobody cares, nobody says anything. So it's a lot less of a big deal than you think it will be. I opt out of several other traditions as well. I don't buy Christmas cards or birthday cards. I buy presents, but I won't buy the cards. Because if I can't say it to you without a piece of really crummy cardboard with somebody else's words on it, what's the point? Isn't it so much more meaningful when somebody else says those wonderful words to us than when somebody buys a card with somebody else's very cheesy thoughts on? So, right, I don't buy Christmas cards, don't buy birthday cards, and we don't celebrate Valentine's. We tend to have a good meal out at this time of year, but often not on Valentine's Day. But I'll tell you about my worst ever Valentine's Day. I was going to a business meeting with a friend, and we're sorting out the deal of how we're going to work together. It happens to be Valentine's Day. Neither of us necessarily realise this until we go out for dinner after, having been talking business all day. So there's two young men, and every restaurant we get to, of course, there's candles and a little rose on the table. So yeah, we have to sit down. Now, this now looks quite odd, especially in this part of the world near Brighton, which, you know, is one of the gay capitals of the world. So yeah, I think the horrible thing about Valentine's is that a lot of people are shutting themselves out of any other market that year, and I think a lot of businesses could do really well if they had a restaurant with a Valentine's free zone dedicated.
That would be
No
great.
flowers, no little band going around. I bet you they'd be packed every year on that day, don't you?
But Ammon, don't you think that a part of the ability to say I opt out, and beyond finding somebody who opts out with you and beyond feeling comfortable in that particular relationship, is just to say I recognize this for what it is, and not it's a commercial crappy holiday and I hate Hallmark, although that may be how you feel too, but this is an attempt by some smart people to use something that's at the core of me, which is really my biology, right? My need to get my genes into the next generation, my need to reproduce or be in a couple or whatever it is, and they're using that need that exists inside of me and coupling it with fear that I'm not going to be able to do that to sell me a product. And it sounds really cold, but if you can look at it that way, it stops being such a big deal, because then you kind of feel sorry for the other people who are buying into it so much. Now, on the other hand, if you love Valentine's Day and it really gets you excited, then that's great. You know, you can feel the same way and feel sorry for the people who don't know better, if you want to think of it that way. But I really think there's an element of self-awareness or an element of recognition, you know, which is kind of what Codebreakers is all about, being able to recognize these things that are being used in different marketing tools. There's an element of recognition that has to happen. And then you can decide. If you recognize and you agree, then by all means participate. But just don't go out there and participate without really knowing why, I guess is what I'm saying.
Yeah. And I'm going to quickly throw this back to that classic A word that Gina mentioned earlier. A lot of this is about real authenticity. It's about saying, well, hang on, this action isn't me. I'm not going to do it. I'm going to stand up and be seen not to do this. And I'm not going to let you guilt me into thinking I have to, because I don't. It's not me. And what's important, it's more important that I be honest than that I fit in. I think we all worry too much about fitting in, and fitting in is bland. Fitting in is the opposite of being an individual. And I think we just need to actually be more honest with ourselves and say, I don't like that. I'm not going to do it. And not feel that we have to pretend to like it.
That being able to register the tiny, tiny nuances, you know, in ourselves, being able to identify what we're feeling is, I think it's one of the hugest challenges of being human. And with all of the external pressures, there's additional pressure on us. You know, it all starts right here. And if I can accomplish that inner knowledge, the understanding of what I actually really feel, enough to stand up for my own feelings and my own self, then I have a lot more power, a lot less fear, a lot more strength against what I'm being barraged with externally. So, yeah, Ammon, you're right on. And you know, bringing it back to objectification and self-objectification, it's all about awareness, because the bigger picture is probably not going to change anytime soon. It's not going to go away. So the only thing that we can really do is be responsible for ourselves. You know, it's one person at a time, and that's us first. And then for those of us who are raising children, it's our children. And for those of us who aren't raising children, it's any relationship we have with a child or a young adult. You know, we can influence each other to have a stronger armor against the attack of what comes at us commercially, and make our own choices about how we want to perceive the world, how we want to perceive our relationships, how we want to be in them, how we want to respond to going into the pharmacy and seeing, and the whole store is pink and red and hearts and balloons and candy and crap. And it starts, Christmas starts in August now, etc. We're all aware of all of that. We really need to start with ourselves and just registering those small, tiny moments where we get kind of suckered and hooked in. It's a talent. It takes some discipline, I think.
It does. And speaking of external pressures, Michael Shane David has a great comment here. He says, people go into work after Valentine's Day and tell stories about what they got. People do that after doing not much all weekend and suggest some fantastic stories for the consumption of their coworkers. So I mean, again, it's going back to those pressures that I was talking about. Even if you yourself have that awareness, and so it's this two-step flow, right? We get these marketing pressures. We see all the pink, we see all the red, but then the people around us are responding to those marketing pressures, and they are furthering them, because now they're being like, oh my God, I got this awesome thing. I got this huge teddy bear. It's so great. So I mean, it's twofold, and the two-step flow theory of communication says that people are much more influential than anything in broadcast television. If something in broadcast television tells you to do something, you kind of hear it. If a person that you know tells you to do something, you're more likely to respond to it. So I just think that that's a great comment from Michael.
I was worried Alex had disappeared. I thought she was off in the kitchen getting a drink while she was talking to me.
I wanted it up there long enough for everyone to know I'm not the brains behind that comment. It was somebody else. It wasn't me.
No, and it was great. Although I do think it's interesting because that's one of the things, that's part of memetics, right? How does it spread? Well, obviously, how we feel and what we talk about with the people we're closest to helps this spread. But that's where what Gina said to us, which is, start talking to people about how you feel about it. Don't be afraid to be the person who stands up and says, I'd rather take my spouse or my significant other or, my kid or someone important to me, my mom, out to a nice meal sometime when there's not a million people in the restaurant. So I'm going to do it next weekend. That can have as much impact as everybody jumping on the bandwagon of, oh, and what did you get? What did you get? Kristen, did you have a comment? Sorry, I saw you had a comment pulled up. Let's look at what Kristen's got. You're muted, Kristen.
Okay, so I just wanted to bring up a comment from Imran because it was exactly right on with what we're all saying with the marketers. He says, it's the truth about massacre marketers' capabilities on occasions like this, and time has lost the significance of color, red, and heart. It is wrong for humans to lose history and significance in the ironic age of information, data, and accessibility. Yeah, you're always sensible, Imran.
Well, we got two sides to this actually, because red is the colour of sex. There is a reason that certain parts of your body fill with blood and turn red, and why that this has a direct association with reproduction and therefore with love and everything else to do with it. And yeah, in both ways, they're both associated with the fact we are creatures of meat. It's always a tough thing, but yeah, I wouldn't say that they are deliberately saying, oh, love is like blood. Actually, we're saying that love is to do with blood in the first place. We're talking about heated blood. We're talking about, chemicals running through our blood. Blood is the stuff of life, and life incorporates both ends. The love that causes it, or at least the lust that causes it, the lust that is part of our desire through the middle, and of course, the meaty end, which is us turning into red meat.
And a heart is a much more appealing symbol than
than other things.
Yeah.
So Aaron, what you're saying is there's a reason that 50 Shades of Grey had a red room, and it's not just because you like the color red. Is that what you're saying?
Quite. I must admit, you know, the 50 Shades has been brought up by a few of our people, starting with Aaron.
Of course.
50 Shades of Ammon.
Nice, nice.
I think he's just on about my hair turning grey. That's all he means. But yeah, he brought up the 50 Shades of Ammon Johns, which then brought out several critiques of the book, including 50 Shades of Grey for beginners, which I must admit is what I've heard from those who read it. It's not actually that great a book. This is a big surprise to you. You've probably led a pretty dull life so far. But yeah, grey isn't the colour of passion, is it?
No, but it's. Oh, sorry. I was just going to say, but it's interesting that the persona that they've chosen is the archetype of powerful, both, you know, in the physical sense, but also in the financial sense, because the guy's got, you know, more money than God, and yet at the same time, this kind of, you know, person that you want to help, so you get the mothering instinct. I mean, in terms of creating a persona that appeals to women, I can understand why it works.
Yes,
because
but
it's
of
kind
course
of the total package.
they actually played with the trope terribly. I've worked in a lot of sectors over the years, including some very unusual ones, and I have worked with dominatrix websites and spoken extensively with dominatrixes. The majority of their customers are the Mr. Greys. They are the subs. People who are powerful in their life are the ones that want to be sub in their private time. Whereas the ones who want to be powerful are usually the ones who are quite powerless in their day-to-day lives. They're the ones who want to be the dominant.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
But yeah, you know, who wants a 50 Shades of Grey where the guy's a street cleaner in real life?
It wouldn't sell well, right? Which is interesting because there's a ton of controversy around it, which is smart marketing clearly, but it's not a new story. You know, I mean, yes, it's got different quirks of it that are new, like the fact that he's super powerful and rich, but the truth is this type of story that's been used to show the more carnal side of a relationship has existed for a long time. And so why do we always, again, we fall into this meme, right? We fall into this thing where it's like, oh, we should be shocked, we should be outraged, we should not allow our kids to watch this, we should boycott the movie, we should, you know, and again, you need to make your own decision, to me, is what I take away from it. But I find it's interesting to have your buttons pushed and to not recognize that that's what's happening.
Well, and okay, so I haven't read the book. I heard an interview with the author, and she herself said, she was like, I think it's hilarious that this is popular because she said she thought it was a piece of shit. Like, she said that she wrote it as being a terrible book, so she was like, this is hilarious that it's so popular. But I think what's interesting about it is that it's a romance novel, right? It started as a romance novel, and romance novels, I mean, I'm thinking romance novels is like the porn for women, right? I mean, right. That's the equivalent. So if we look at it that way, is it empowering?
I don't know. That's a good question, because if it's perpetuating this stereotype of you still need someone to come along and tell you what to do, whether it's in the office or in the bedroom, I'm not sure how empowering that is.
There's that wonderful scene, isn't there, in one of the classic romance stories of our time, Pretty Woman, where he climbs the fire escape, and of course he's terrified of heights. What happens after he climbs the tower and rescues the princess? She turns right around and rescues him back. And that's the myth of our time, isn't it? That we need each other. And there's always been this thing that it's the powerful man who needs the woman. And it's actually her power over him. He could have anything. He's the successful doctor, or he's the great explorer, or he's the famous personality. He could have anything in the world, and she has the power over him to captivate this man.
But,
now,
go ahead.
Is it the right way? I don't know, but is that ultimately this is a story of the powerlessness, the powerless having power, and I think part of that was that women felt a little deprecated in other ways, but to men, women have always had immense power.
Well, and what I find interesting in the example that you give of Pretty Woman is that what she's really rescuing him from is himself, right? His inability to connect with his emotions, his inability to express what he feels. And so, yeah, in that sense, it's very interesting.
In a very real sense, she's rescuing him from the objectification that we started this hangout on. He has bought into all the things he's supposed to be. Go out, hunt, more. Forget the emotional side. You're a man. It's all about being strong, dominating these companies, making money. The more you make, the more of a man you are. And she's helping him rein that back.
That's so funny because I hadn't thought of it that way. But you're right. Is that something that you would say that's relatively recent, right? This notion that it's important for men to own or experience their emotions, that's also something that might only date, I don't know, 40 years. I look at my dad. That's not high on his priority list, for example.
My grandmother is a classic one. And, I mean, you know, she comes from that older generation, and she was not a fan of women's lib. Equality with men? Why would I want to lose all my power, she said. Because she was the absolute ruler of the house. Literally, if my grandfather went home one day and she said, I'm fed up of living here, we're moving, they moved. No two ways about it. And I think a lot of our families, we point elsewhere and say, oh, women aren't so strong. But actually, you look at most families, there is a damn strong matriarch who is the core of that whole family. And it's when the matriarch dies that family kind of disintegrates a little. So, yeah, I would say that actually women have always had a lot more power. And to an extent, a lot of feminism is based on people who are the exceptions to that rule, who didn't embrace their own power, who weren't able to... There were some feminists who weren't very good at the social stuff. They weren't the glue of their family. They were quite objectionable people who, you know, therefore didn't have that power and wanted to, you know, well, I want to have my power as a man. I don't want to have to think about doing this a different way. I'm not sure that's actually been a great win.
Well,
my grandmother certainly didn't think so.
Well, I think the difference is that if you have power but you don't have the agency to use it, then is it really power? That's the question. Like if, you know, in Switzerland, for example, up until the 70s, there was a canton, which is kind of like a state, where women didn't have the vote, but they didn't want it. They didn't want the vote. They wanted to stand behind their husbands and say, you go do this, and then if something went wrong, then they could still have that step back of deniability to say, oh, but, you know, I didn't vote. I didn't pick. It wasn't me. And so I think there are some people, which I can understand, it makes me uncomfortable if I had to exercise my power through somebody else. If I couldn't just say what I thought, I had to wait for my husband to say it for me. There's something about that rankles. I wouldn't like that.
Yeah, but that's assuming that you still see your husband as a strong, independent figure, rather than the way my grandmother did see men, which is you do what you're told. You know, this was her agent. That was his job. She had the clever thoughts, and it was his job to be her secretary and go out in the world and do what he'd been told. And there were a lot of women like that. And when you talk about feminism, you are ignoring that kind of woman, and there were a lot of them. There were a lot of them. And those women are a lot better off in the old system than in the new. They've actually lost power.
Yeah, but do you think that reaction or that method of exercising your power was actually developed because there was no other choice? I mean, like, to me, how I saw that was this was the only way they could exercise any power at all. So, of course, they took a hold of that and they used it as they could to make their lives better. But wouldn't it be better if everybody could just say what they thought and be treated the same? So I don't know. Gina, yeah. I think you're dying to talk about this.
I don't even know where to start. It's just, I'm looking at the clock. I'm going, Ammon, we've got 3 minutes left, and you raised this very inflammatory concept, and I don't even know where to begin. So I've just chosen to not try. But I think it's a lot more. What I'll say is that it's a lot more complex than I believe than it's being illustrated in the last few minutes, and I don't have a very authoritative method right in this moment to come back at that. But my whole body, yes, my adrenaline raised, got some cortisol running. I'm definitely stirred up by some of the things that you said. And in my family, it was my great-grandmother who had the power. I mean, I've seen this firsthand as well, but the need to use it in the home instead of out in the world, it's not the same as being powerful out in the world. It just is not. And, you know, coming from the generation, you know, I came up during a very powerful feminist time. So a lot of my own beliefs and my own ways of operating in my marriage, in my life, in my work life, in everything I've ever known have stemmed from what I was learning as a young adult and the things that I was exploring as an artist, and the things that I was reading and influenced by. And there has been a tremendous amount of backlash against that, and feminism has become a dirtier word, and it's become there are a lot more complicated attitudes towards it, and it's not something that can be addressed quickly. Is I guess what I'm trying to say ultimately. But we could probably have a pretty good heated conversation. Luckily we're friends, so it's all good. But yeah, and I really respect a lot of the things that you say also. So I don't have just sort of this automatic, you're wrong. It's more complicated.
Yeah.
So thanks, Stephanie. I was kind of elevating off my seat.
I saw Gina, and I'm like, oh, she's going to explode. Come on, we got to let Gina get in here.
What do I say? You know, I need my crew here.
No, I mean, I think you're right, it's a very complicated issue, and I think we may know what we're going to talk about the next time we get together. if I had to guess, I think that'll probably be it. But we are already over time. It's been a great discussion, as always. But maybe what we can do is we can go ahead and start giving some closing thoughts and try to help people walk away from this with something that they can apply to their lives. Besides, go buy a Valentine's Day card for your wife, because I'm not going to suggest that.
And
I don't think anyone else will. No, exactly. So if I think about all the things we've talked about, you know, we've talked about objectification, and we've talked about how some of these traditions, some of these things move from meme to tradition, and they've become so ingrained in our culture that we really have a hard time rethinking them, and we act in ways that aren't necessarily true to ourselves because we buy into that, and we just say, well, that's the way it's supposed to be. I think my principal closing thought or suggestion would be something I think I said before, but you know, when you're about to do something, ask yourself the question, why? Why is it I'm going to do this? Because if you're doing it because your friend said you should, or because you think it's going to impress somebody, that's probably not going to help you get closer to being happy. Whereas if you're doing something because you feel like it's the right thing to do, then I think that's helpful. That's always a good guide, and that holds true in your personal life as well as in your business life. Because I work with business owners, and a lot of times they don't know why they're doing something, and it almost always works out poorly for them. So I would just encourage you to ask yourself the question, why? Why am I doing this? And if you don't have a clear answer, then just wait until you do.
I think that's just a perfect, that just was so well said, Stephanie. And what's been interesting to me is that I was raised by a woman who called herself the original feminist. I called myself a feminist. I will still call myself a feminist. And yet, I see in myself behaviors that I would prefer not to have. And I see myself falling into self-objectification and objectifying others. And so I think it's what's really important, and for me a big takeaway is very similar to your why, Stephanie. It's just really looking at what we are doing as individuals. Because sometimes we think we're behaving in a particular way and we're lying to ourselves. So I think it's really great to kind of begin to peel away the layers of that onion and reveal what's really going on in our own behaviors and see the little places that we can check out and look at and ask why and make a conscious choice rather than just going on habit and not being conscious or aware of what it is that we're doing, because we're all contributing. Every single one of us is contributing to what we're calling a problem. So that would be my closing.
You both said it so well. Can I just like skip for today and say I'm tired and be like what they said? As far as like what Steph, I think what both Stephanie and Gina are saying is that we need to find a way to change ourselves and our own behaviors in order to help make this a more societal change. And I guess my personal takeaway is baby steps, because whenever I see concepts like this, whenever I see, you know, people are like, oh, we're self-objectifying, my immediate reaction is, okay, I'm not going to do it. And that's not necessarily how it works, right? Like, I'm just like, oh, done, fixed. And things like this, we just can't function that way. So even when I have those moments where I am like, oh my God, I feel so fat today, they're going to come up. It happens. And that is self-objectification. It's putting a bunch of my self-worth into the way that I look. And sometimes I'm just going to have to accept that I have those moments of objectification. But there can be other times where I say, okay, why am I doing this to myself? Why does this matter? So I think it's just, that's my takeaway for today. These are huge concepts, huge changes that we're asking for, and for me personally, it's just baby steps in making it happen for myself so that hopefully I can make it happen for others.
Kristen, any closing thoughts?
Oh my God. Chipmunk.
Okay, we're right at the wrap up, so I'm afraid we might get Kristen back in time, we might not. Okay, I have been the token man this week, and in a position that, let's face it, would be pretty damn scary for most guys. You're going to be sat on a panel with 4 women talking feminist issues. My God, how are you going to be able to say anything meaningful without feeling like they're all going to jump on you? And that's kind of where we've gone with this whole episode in a way. We are in an age where we are now able to reject the social pressures that mostly are coming at us from marketing. We are at a position where we are able to stand on our own 2 feet, use social media to talk as effectively as any company can, and say, do you know what, this is what I believe, this is what I refuse to buy into, and no matter who disagrees with me, I welcome that disagreement, I welcome the discussion it's going to bring, but I know who I am, I know what I believe, and I am going to stand by that. And I think one of the things I would like everyone to take away from this is exactly what we're saying. Where Hallmark and 1,000 companies have said you've got to do this on Valentine's, you are able to put in your comment stream, I'm not going to buy this anymore. That classic thing in the film Network. I'm mad as hell and I'm not going to take this anymore. Now, I'm not saying we all have to end in death, but I do think it's time sometimes that we just say, do you know what, enough's enough. I know who I am. I'm not going to let your expectations define me. I'm going to be who I am and try and change things. And even if I'm only changing them for me, if others buy into that, we change them for everyone. So that's my closing thought. Christine?
Amen. Am I still a chipmunk?
You're good.
No, you're fine.
Oh, okay. Then amen, brother. Okay.
Okay, that brings us to the end for this week. Thank you all for being with us. We will carry on comments. So, you know, if there's some of these sidelines that you want to go down them in the comment stream. We do keep up. Thanks everyone for joining us, and see you next time.